Okay, well, let's start another episode here. Hello, folks. Rebecca Adams here, and I have Becky Vermeer and Meg with me. And we are here for episode 2 of listening to Meg's story. We're learning a lot. She's an amazing young lady, and we are so grateful that you're here, Meg. So, Becky, I'll let you ask that question again because as the queen of the questioning or queen of questions,
Easy
is that
for
what
you
I
to
said?
say.
Right? Whatever it was I called you, it's very
Wait, you
fitting.
wrote it down, didn't you?
That's right. The
I
queen of
did.
questions.
On her resume.
Yes,
Yeah.
queen of questions. Yes.
Queen
So,
of questions. That's me.
so Becky, as the queen of questions, I'll let you re-ask the question that you asked her at the last of episode 1.
Okay. So at the end of episode 1, when we were talking, I had asked Meg a little bit about as she grew older when she started entering into relationships. And we kind of talked a little bit about stability and security and looking for some things like that. And so my question was, what led up to you entering into the relationship that you had with your ex-husband?
Well, are you ready for a story?
Yes, we like stories.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go back a little bit before I met him. I was with somebody else and we had a decent relationship. I wouldn't call it perfect. I mean, there was a lot of jealousy and control on his end. Like I remember I was gonna get a job as a hostess just for something to do, for something fun. And he didn't want me to get a job as a hostess because he didn't want his, like, if I bought him a nice gift, he didn't want his friends to say, oh, how many people did your girlfriend, you know, have to flirt with to be able to afford that? Now, to give him a tiny bit of credit, I mean, just a minuscule, he was 19, I was 20. I mean, we were young kids at the time. And we had this nice 5-year plan. And, we were both going to finish school. We were both going to, do these plans. And then after year 5, like we were going to get married and we were, because by that point we would be able to get married and have kids. We had it all planned out. And when you plan out your life so perfectly, you know what the first thing that's going to happen is.
It's gonna fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I ended up finding out, surprise, I'm pregnant. And we weren't even into year 1 of our 5-year plan. And I didn't know what to do. I kept it in because I was scared. I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't know what to do. And keeping a secret like that, like he's like, I don't know what's going on with you. Who are you're not even the same person, yada yada. So finally I broke down, I cried, I told him, I showed him the tests, everything else. He freaked out and he ran off. And in that moment, my heart just broke. And I was living on the water at the time, like on the ocean. A block away, I walked down to the beach and I'm like, I'm just gonna get on my board because I like surf and paddleboard, all that, and every water sport that I'm a big water baby. I'm like, I'm just gonna get on my board. I'm just gonna sit. I'm just gonna relax. And I had my first seizure. So I hit my head on my board. I fall in the water. At first, the people on the beach thought I was doing yoga. Then they realized, wait, she's not coming back up because, I was known for doing yoga on the beach and everything. So I get dragged out. I get rushed to the hospital as a Jane Doe. But I'm Jane Doe for half a second because this is the same hospital I was a candy striper in. My mother was an executive in the ambulance. We're pretty sure they knew who I was. They weren't 100% sure. So I mean, like as soon as I walked in, people knew who I was. It wasn't like I was this big mystery person. So I wake up the next morning and I don't really remember anything because I hit my head so hard. And when I say I don't really remember anything, I couldn't even tell you my name. I had a little bit of amnesia. Now, that's bad enough. But this happens to be September 11th, 2001, that I wake up in a hospital in Portland, Maine, which is where the people flew out of. So the whole hospital's in a frenzy.
Wow.
I'm still kind of out of it. Like, I really couldn't tell you much of anything. So they have to, like, do you know what the Twin Towers are? Like, do you remember this type of stuff? And I'm like, what? So I ended up staying in the hospital for quite some time just to get over everything, to get over, and I mean, I miscarried. So just to get over it all. And in this process, I found out that I lost some people in the attacks as well. So my engagement, because at the time we were engaged, like we weren't planning on getting married, but we're like, we're just going to be engaged. So my engagement ended. I lost my baby, and 9/11 happened all within a 24-hour period. So for anybody, that's going to mess you up.
Oh yeah.
So for a few weeks, I stayed in the hospital, and I got some help because I needed it because I was so depressed. I got out, and I was a little lost. Thankfully, I was, came from a upper middle class family. I wasn't forced to go right back to school. I wasn't forced to go get a real job. I kind of stayed with my mother on the beach and hung out with my friends. And one of my friends got a job at a department store. And I'd just go over there and hang out because I've always had a shopping addiction. I don't know where I would have gotten that from if you had listened to episode 1. I've always had a shopping addiction, and that's kind of my comfort. Retail therapy is my comfort. Again, I wouldn't know why. That's not just the only way my mother bonded with me. But so I decided to get a part-time job at this department store too. And at the department store, there was this guy that would kind of flirt with me, and he worked in the men's department. I worked in the women's, and would flirt back and forth. And um, long story short, 6 months later, we were married.
Wow.
And we met in November, married by April. My mother spent $20,000 on this wedding back in 2002. Not, are you sure you want to get married? Nope, just kept signing the checks. And I didn't really get to pick much of the wedding myself. So it wasn't even like it was me saying, I want this, I want that. But yeah, and then so that was April of 2002. January of 2003, at the end of January 2003, my son was born. And 2 weeks later, I turned 22.
Wow, that's an
Going fast.
action-packed story so far.
That's what I mean. If you want a story, I got a story. And the thing is, it sounds so like unbelievable, but it can be so fact-checked. That's like how, like, like how can somebody, but it's true. Like, sometimes you like don't even believe, like when you hear it out loud, you're like, wow, I actually went through that, but that's what it was, and my ex-husband, the reason we got married so quickly is, we were living in a post 9/11 world. He was saying how I come from the military. I mean, on my father's side, we go back so far in the military that my I think it's 5 or 6 great grandfather shot the first shot of the first naval battle of the American Revolutionary War. That's how far back my family goes in the Navy. Like, as soon as you're in this country, like, you're in the Navy. So my ex-husband was like, oh, I was in the Army, I want to join back up. And I'm like, okay, like military life just makes sense to me, so I'm like, okay, let's do this. Turns out the first time he never made it through boot camp. He got some injury, but he made it seem like he was this military person. Everything he said to me was a lie, everything. And just the love bombing, everything. So I'm like thinking to myself, oh, this military man, no. So we have to pull these strings to get him back into boot camp. He finally gets back in. So he was supposed to go out on the end of April. That's why we got married in April. That's why we got married so quickly, so we could stay together. He didn't go into the military for about 2 years later. Never made it out of boot camp the second time. And I had I've had like, when my ex-husband and I were dating, I had an ectopic pregnancy. So I'd had a miscarriage and ectopic pregnancy. My son was a twin, and I had lost another baby before that. And this was all lupus. I didn't know I had lupus at the time, and lupus causes this. So, but I didn't find this out until years later. And then my daughter was born December 16th, and my son turned 2 the next month. So my kids were like 24 months apart. So it wasn't until right after my daughter was, when I was pregnant with my daughter, he was in the boot camp, and I had such a horrible pregnancy with both kids. But my daughter was born 2 months premature. We had to call the Red Cross, everything, to get him here to help with this, my son, and everything else. So that's why he didn't finish it the second time. But he never fully got out of the military. So he ended up going AWOL and not finishing everything. So when my daughter is a baby, he gets arrested, gets shipped to Fort Knox. My sister and her husband at the time, my sister I don't get along with, but this is before I got ties with her, they were stationed at Fort Knox at the time. So at least there was that. But then also at the same time, we had like family members that through the military and stuff. So you didn't have to stay there too long. But it was just, and then at one point, even before this, when I was pregnant with so that was when I was pregnant with my daughter. When I was pregnant with my son, right after we got married, he decided we needed to move to Oklahoma so he could go to Bible school, so we could both become pastors, pack up a U-Haul, and just go. No jobs ahead of time, no place to live, no money, just depend on God to provide. So, I mean, this is the beginning of my marriage. And I remember even the week leading up to my wedding, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Oh no, it's cold feet. No, no, no. I don't want to, I don't. And then one of my sisters said to my mother, what happens if we can't get her down the aisle? My mother's like, oh well, at least we'll have a nice party. Everything's paid for. We can at least have a nice party. But they got me down the aisle. 11 years later, I finally got divorced. But yeah, so it took about 11 and a half years to get divorced. And this past June, it's been a decade since I've been divorced, but it's really only been a couple of years since I've been completely free. He has gotten remarried, has some stepchildren, and a new baby with a new wife. So since he's been remarried, and now that the kids are both, over 18 and out of high school, I don't have to deal with them much unless it comes up with, one of the kids brings them up.
Yeah. Well, then, so clearly at the beginning of your relationship, there was a lack of trust because he's not being honest to you. What other kind of things occurred?
Everything that he told me, like, I remember Christmas Eve during all of this. So it was like we were dating about a month. It was the first time in a long time that all 4 of my siblings were together. And since then, it's only been one other time since then that all 4 of us have been together. And it's mainly because, my brother lives in Europe. At one point, I had a sister in New Zealand and a sister in Alaska. Like we're all spread out. So it's really hard for us to all be together. But my nephews were there, and my brother's in entertainment. And my ex-husband was telling him how he used to do off Broadway. And my brother was kind of quizzing him about this, really off Broadway. And he's like, yeah, I used to do some dancing, and I guess he was doing some boxing for a while. So then they're like, oh, you should do some ballet. And where he was like, because boxers take ballet. And so where he was doing it, he ended up working with some kids. And I actually live off the street. There's a street not too far from me called Broadway. And there's a theater that's off of Broadway in a little town in Maine. So to him, that was doing off Broadway. So it's like little things here and there. So he was telling my
stretch.
Not thinking that my brother was going to see through it and figured it out within seconds, because this is somebody who is a professional entertainer worldwide, And then there's other little things here and there that just were not true. And they all just added up. And right before we got married, we found out his father was going to jail. His biological father that I didn't even know existed. And he was going to jail for doing some not so good things to foster children. And so, of course, he's like, oh, I have nothing to do with him. Like, I haven't talked to him since I was 13, yada, yada. So, like, you have to feel bad for him because I don't have a great father. So I don't want to hold, I'm a big person that sins of the father. I don't hold them against people. So I just kind of let it go. And I let so many things go. And it got to the point where because you want to believe this person, you want to trust this person, you just let it slide. You just let it slide. You just let the red flags slide. And I notice I've done that in other relationships as well. You let these, red flags, they're not pink. You think they are, but they're like scarlet, bright crimson red. And you just let them slide. And then it takes a while when you're like looking back where you have this big bucket of flags, that people have been leaving on the field and you're picking up after them. And you realize you're not with the person you thought you were. And that took me about 5 years because honestly, the beginning, I was a 21-year-old bride. I had my first child 2 weeks before my 22nd birthday, had a horrible pregnancy that was very traumatic. And then when, like my son was a twin and I lost a child and everything else. And then I went into having another, I had a miscarriage between the two and then another. So I was a zombie. I was just a zombie, just trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, do everything at church he told me to, do everything here they told me to, be the perfect daughter, be the perfect friend, do everything for everybody because I had this tax I had to pay that I didn't realize until 20 some years later. I did not have to pay this tax. So it got to the point where it took so long for me to even realize that I wasn't with the person I thought I was with.
Would you have called those flags red flags at the time? Or is it looking back and considering the relationship that you now call them red flags?
Well, I think the fact that I had rose-colored glasses on, I just thought everything was red. And like, oh, it just blends in. Like if a friend of mine was dating somebody, I would have called them out.
Mm-hmm.
All my friends, like I lost a few friends in this because they're like, what are you doing? You're ruining your life being with this person. Like I had a friend literally tell me I was ruining my life by getting married and having a kid with this man. Not getting married and having a kid, but with this man. She's like, you are the smartest out of our whole group. You are the one that's supposed to make us all rich, like you're supposed to have this great law firm and everything. What are you doing with this person? My ex-husband had an 8th, 9th grade level education that I didn't even know. He just knew how to talk and hide it. But he wasn't that smart. But if it was anybody else, like if you were telling me like at the same exact time these things, I would have been like, those are red flags, run. But wait, oh no, he's different. It's different with him. So if it was anybody else, I would have thought they were red flags, but because it was him, he was perfect. I remember one time, and my biggest thing, if you want to punish me, my kryptonite is the silent treatment. Because I will do anything I'm so sorry, what do I need to do? Don't take don't take that away from me because like you can't just like disappear on me. So I remember one time I wasn't even old enough to drink, but my friend was a bartender. I was staying at the bar and it was a few months before my 21st birthday, but I was having a drink and it was the old cell phones because this is like 2001, like, and I remember asking her, can you go call my cell phone? I want to make sure it's working. Because what if he called and my cell phone wasn't working? And she's like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, who is this person? This isn't my friend. Like, I don't know who you are, like, to actually do this. But I did, And yeah, so like, I would have never thought that was a red flag, but everybody else around me saw it. And if anybody else had done it, if like my friend had asked me to do the same thing, I would have been like, give me that phone, and I would have thrown it away, But because it was me and him, it seemed like it was natural and it was supposed to be like that.
So when you met him, based on what you've said, you were yourself kind of in a broken state. Like you'd gone through a lot of trauma, and then you meet this person. This is an interesting question, I guess. It just popped into my head. Do you think that had you met him when you were not in this broken state, do you think that there would have been a relationship developed there?
1000% no. No relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even anybody that knows us, they're like, how were you two ever together?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like even his best friend from a childhood is like, you know how they say that men grow up and marry their mothers? And he's like, you know, and I'll be the first one, like his first wife, who I love and adore, looks exactly like his mother acts. And he's like, I married the twin of my mother. He's like, but you married the complete opposite, like night and day. Like there is no way that we would have ever been in a relationship. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have even been attracted to him if I wasn't in the state I was in. But I was just so starved for love. And when I had the ectopic pregnancy and I lost that child, and his reaction was he wanted to take care of me and love me and marry me, as opposed to what had happened
Right.
months before. That alone is what pushed me down the aisle.
Mm-hmm. So then what happened over the course of your relationship as it evolved, as you got better? You're not going to stay broken.
I
So are
stayed
you trying to
broken.
better yourself, trying to get past that brokenness? How does he respond to that?
I stayed broken
Oh, you
because
did?
he kept breaking me.
Okay.
He never let me heal. The more I was down, the
So he
better.
wanted you broken.
He did.
Yeah.
Because if I was strong, he couldn't
Mm-hmm.
control me. And it was when I finally got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And it was more when the kids started getting into school and the kids started getting into activities. And I was allowed to hang out with the mothers in these activities. I was never allowed to hang out with my friends, my girlfriends that like were sisters to me, the people that were the closest to me, because I would go out and would go to a show. You know, there might be alcohol, but it wasn't like I was getting drunk because I had kids to go home to. But you'd have to be 21. He never wanted me drinking or anything, but you'd have to be 21. And we'd get to, and I always looked a lot younger than I was. And I'd get to a place and I'd have to show my ID. Guess what wasn't in my wallet? Somehow mysterious, and this would happen so often because he didn't want me hanging out with them. But then when the kids started doing stuff like cheering and karate and Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts, like I would have to be the Girl Scout leader. Like I could hang out with the women from church, but they all had, but I couldn't. So when I could finally hang out with other mothers like that, and would have them over, and I could start being myself a little bit. And he was always very antisocial to begin with, so he never wanted to go out. So I got to go out, and like, when the girls were at practice, the moms might go and get a drink at like, get a glass of wine and then go back, or go to Target and go shopping and go back or something. And I could be around people and be myself a little and joke and have fun. That's when I started being able to build myself up because I could finally be me. And within a year or so, I finally was able to just get him out for good. We had a house that had like an in-law apartment in the basement. So at first he was living in the basement and that apartment for a while. And I told him flat out, and he was not always faithful in our marriage, but I was. And I remember when I told him that we were done, it did take me a while to like actually file for divorce. I mean, at one point, years before that, I took the kids and I drove to Philadelphia, from Maine to Philadelphia, because that's where my family is. Moved in with a cousin and got a job. He followed me, showed up on Easter weekend. So there were times I did try to leave. But when I finally told him I'm leaving, like this is done, you're not living in, we're not sharing a room. I know we can't afford two places right now. You can go live down in the basement, but I'm going to live my own life. You've lived your life. I'm going to live mine. I'm going to date. I'm going to, do whatever. So I went on a couple dates with this man who was a wonderful person. Neither of us were in a really good spot, so it didn't work out. But he said something to me that clicked, and it made me realize that I needed to run. And I should have ran a long time ago. And he had been in a similar situation where he had slept on a couch for 5 years, while his marriage and everything and divorce, because he didn't want to get divorced and everything. And he was going to therapy. And I can't remember if it was therapy or a friend or something. And somebody had said to him, when your daughter gets married on her wedding day, do you want her to look at her husband, look deep in his eyes, and say, I am so in love with you. I'm so glad we're married. I love you so much. Give him a kiss. And then say, I'll see you in the morning. Go sleep on the couch. Because that's how they think a marriage is. That's how they think. So he's like, do you want your daughter to say, okay, I'll see you in the morning. Now go down to your apartment. And he's like, so your children are going to think whatever goes on in your household is normal. And is that what you want? And I thought about my own family and myself. And that's when I was like, you need to move out. I'm filing for divorce.
And he respected that.
When he got the divorce papers, he did somewhat. And when he got the protection order, he did. And when we got the Varda alarm in our house, because no, he did not respect that at all. Yeah. We ended up getting a protection order. We ended up getting, I don't know if you're familiar with the Varda alarm. So it stands for something. And what it is I know in the state of Maine, at least at the time, there's only 5 because they're very expensive to get. And it's a silent alarm. So if somebody comes near you, you push a button, it alerts the police, and they are there within minutes. So we got one to keep in our house that we could push. Now, if the fact that I got one meant they had to take it from somebody else in another part of the state, because they only had 5 for the entire state. I don't know if that's still the case, but at the time. So that's how severe they thought that we needed the protection at the time. So when I'm like, I tell people in the state of Maine, I'm like, oh yeah, we got a Varda alarm. And they're like, wow. And like other people will be like, how do you get one of those? I was like, if you get one, it means somebody else has theirs taken away. So like high profile cases will get them. Very severe cases will get them. Yeah.
And so what prompted the need for the restraining order? Like what was his behavior?
He threatened to kill me. He got abusive. He threatened to take the kids, which everybody told me like, oh, they always say that stuff. And there was good evidence and reason to believe he was abusing the children as well, but I was never able to get protection orders on them until they were teenagers. But yeah, due to the abuse, due to the threats, we lived on a private road with only 4 houses. And we were one of the first houses, and we were the only house that didn't have horses. So like everybody had big yards. And at the end, the 2 houses at the end, it was a father on one side, a son on the other. The son, who was our direct next door neighbor, was the chief of police for the next town over. And I actually used to babysit his nieces and nephews because they grew up in the same neighborhood as me. So that came in very handy for us. But even with that, they still felt he was enough of a threat, and he was unstable enough to give us that silent alarm.
Wow.
Every time I've let the restraining order slide for whatever reason, or one time it wasn't granted after a trial and everything else, within a week, I end up with another restraining order because he does something. I can't tell you how many times I testified at our state house to this, that he has violated protection orders at least 45 times for me. But they always say it's a gray area. We can't do anything. Oh, that's a gray area. Oh, that's a gray area. Oh, we'll look into it. Anytime he's ever gotten what is the word I'm looking for? Contempt of court. He'll get charged with contempt of court and, found guilty with no sanctions. That's why in Maine we're fighting to fix a lot of the laws.
Yeah.
Because
so he walks around feeling like he's above the law.
Yes, even with criminal federal charges against him in some cases. And I know I had mentioned being in another relationship. I remember the one time my other relationship, he was an attorney who was a disbarred attorney, but with a lot of connections. So one time he got arrested. Not only was it only a $45 bail, they let the bailiff lend him the money so that he wouldn't have to stay overnight because it was on a Friday over the weekend. He played golf and tennis with the judge, members of the same club. His attorney and his attorney's wife and the judge's wife were on the same, charity function boards. And he did have to pay. I take that back. He did have to pay for his registration, insurance, and inspection of his car, being all expired and all under his dead wife's name still. So he had to pay DMV fines.
But that was it.
That was it. Everything with me was dropped. Wow. The one time somebody actually did something to me and had to face punishment, I actually feel bad about, because I don't think they should have been charged in that case. It was, a relationship I had in between my ex-husband and this relationship. It was a rebound that just kind of lasted a year and a half. That wasn't the greatest, like, verbally to each other. He was an alcoholic. So, surprise, surprise, I ended up with alcoholics. I don't know where that would come from, but he was an alcoholic, and I was trying to get him into rehab. His drinking had gotten out of control. I was in contact with his family. We were getting him to rehab. I was supposed to be driving him. He was going through withdrawals, and he went to grab my phone because he thought I was calling his mother to tattle on him or something. This man's in his 50s. He thinks I'm tattling. I don't know. Starts running off. He ended up hurting my pinky. We ended up having to call the police to get him. But in the state of Massachusetts, if you take somebody's cell phone and make it so they can't call for help, that's a felony. And that's why he was charged. Which I kind of, like I said, my pinky got hurt, big deal. It's fine now. So I do kind of feel bad. But the one good thing about that is his punishment was he had to go to state mandated rehab, which is a little too bad because his parents were going to pay for like a Club Med type thing. And he ended up going to the one through the justice system. But hopefully it, made him catch his, learn a lesson. But that was the only time anybody's actually ever had to pay any type of sanctions for hurting me.
That doesn't seem right.
It doesn't. It just doesn't.
How often do you see that, Becky?
What's that?
How often do you see that?
Frequently.
That's what I was afraid of.
I know, that's the sad thing is
it's so interesting. I'm sorry?
I see that worse daily with, the advocacy work.
Yeah, it's so interesting, especially like in the area that I am, because we have a little bit of that good old boy mentality is what I'll call it. And you can see an abusive male break orders of protection over and over and over again. If they get a slap on the wrist, we're lucky they got that. But most of the time, the answer is, we can't prove that, or that's not a arrestable crime, or whatever else it is. And then you see the woman who's the typical victim in that scenario reach out, lash out, do something, and she goes to jail. Like, I see it all of the time, just the inequality of how that plays out.
And I can't tell you how many times I've been labeled crazy or unstable because I get pushed and pushed, and the reactive abuse. And that's what you see, like with the Gabby Petito body cam, when she was like, everybody thought at first she was the one. No, it's the same thing. You're getting pushed and pushed, and then you just snap. Right. And I am completely guilty of reactive abuse. It's one thing I work a lot to try to prevent from doing. And it's ironically something I talk about a lot and gives talks about sometimes, because especially going into court, it's the one thing that usually bites a woman is by being emotional. But how do you not be emotional at the same time? Are you supposed to just like mask over and detach and become disassociative? And then they're going to say you're not caring enough, that you're faking it and you're making it up, because you would have emotion. If you were really hurt, you would have emotion. But if you have emotion, you're a crazy woman. You just can't win.
Yeah, there's no pleasing anyone in that scenario. It's incredibly unjust.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Incredibly unjust.
Well, we have finished another episode. So this is the end of episode 2. Excuse me. Goodness. And we never saw your socks, Becky.
What? We didn't show my socks.
No, I forgot to ask you about your socks.
Oh no. So I fancy myself to be a little bit of a grill master. I enjoy grilling a lot, actually. And so I have my grill master socks. Whoops. It has a barbecue grill on it, condiments, the whole nine. My grill master socks. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's a great pair of socks right there. Yeah.
Kurtz and Maine got their first real snow yesterday, so there'll be a while before we're grilling. We got a little gusty. It was like, gone before it was even there, because I'm right on, not far from the water, a few blocks.
Yeah.
But everybody else got quite a bit of snow. So
that's the disappointment when the cold weather and the snow comes. It's a little uncomfortable to cook outside. So
yeah.
anytime though, I'll tell you what, anytime in the winter that we get a warm day where the sun is shining and it's not freezing, I'm more than willing.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's just a fun little hobby of mine. I enjoy it.
That's awesome.
Yes. We didn't show us your earrings. You forgot about that too.
No, I didn't. So the pair in episode 1 were paparazzi earrings. And this is probably one of my first paparazzi earrings. $5.
Fancy.
Yep.
Fancy bling.
I go cheap, Meg.
Now, I am all about being a bargain hunter. 100%. People make fun of me. They're like, oh, you have to have everything designer. I was like, no, but I hunt for that. Whatever I see, if I see something, it doesn't matter what it is.
Yep.
If it's a purse that's like, $1,000, I'm going to go online and find it used for like a fraction of the price. My father, one thing that we do have in common, and one thing I got from him, is the bargain hunting. He always tells everybody his favorite designer is Clarence.
Clarence.
What is Clarence?
Yes.
For clearance. Gotcha.
Yes.
I'm a little slow sometimes.
I know, me too. It took me a minute.
Clarence.
I like that.
That's funny.
I like that.
Like if I'm in an area that's a new area that I know is a little bit more wealthy, I'll be like, okay, where's the local TJ Maxx? Because they're going to have higher end ones there, and let me go straight to the back. And
right.
I am all about, getting what you want for the least amount of money, even if it takes you longer.
Absolutely.
Save your points, do it up.
Yep. And it stretches a whole lot further that way.
Yes.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, Meg, do you know the international hand signal for help?
Right?
Very good. Yep.
Did I do it right? Okay.
Yes, you did. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you want to hide that?
I did it, and then I questioned myself.
You did it exactly right. So you're gonna, if you see somebody who's hiding their thumb, then they close their fingers over their thumb, and they may do it over and over again. They may not, but that's the international hand signal for help. You could go to Japan, not know the language, but if you see somebody doing this, you can either help them or go for help, call the police, whatever. Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we are going to listen to episode 3 here in just a moment. We're going to record that with Meg. And just want to encourage you that no matter where you are in this process, you're always free to soar.